our country right now is so divided, and this is, obviously I'm talking about the United States right now. That the United States is so divided that a lot of these projects fall on one side of the aisle or the other. So a combined cycle power plant that's going to be viewed more as conservative. A renewable plant, a solar plant, a wind plant, that's going to be viewed more, left side of the aisle. So I see that as being a major problem.
Welcome to the Blue Ocean Solutions podcast, where we dive into real conversations with business owners, innovators, and industry leaders reshaping the future of clean tech, construction, and the renewable energy sector. I'm Kreel Hutchinson, your host. Our guest today is Colin Kelly, the founder of CrossCurrent on the East Coast. Today, we discuss his unique ability to navigate complex energy project development, from securing approvals to bridging political and community divides, leveraging 2 decades of experience to bring critical infrastructure to life. If you're a founder or executive in the renewable energy, clean tech, or energy-aligned construction, you will love this show because Colin shares invaluable insights into overcoming the often unseen hurdles that stall major projects and how to build consensus in challenging environments. It's an example of how deep industry expertise and strategic relationship building can transform ambitious visions into tangible realities. Welcome to the podcast, Colin.
Thank you. Great to be here, Kreel.
I really enjoyed our initial conversation, so I was so looking forward to this follow-up. For people who may not know your unique work and role, why don't you give a little bit of a brief background of yourself, your role, and your current business endeavor?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Kreel. So I've been in the renewable energy industry for 20 years. I've worked on a variety of different technologies. I started off in the renewable energy space in 2006. My first project was a utility-scale wind power project in Western New York. So it was 126 megawatts. That project was built in 2008. It's been operational ever since then. I just heard that it's actually being repowered by another company as we speak. So it's great to hear that one is continuing. And then went to Texas. I developed wind power plants in Texas, so South Texas, and also West Texas. And then from there, moved on to more utility scale solar projects. So I worked on a 240 megawatt utility scale solar project in California. And then from there, my career took a couple of twists and turns that were actually pretty exciting. Well, natural gas space started to heat up. So I was able to develop manure plants or manure to renewable natural gas plants in Florida and also North Carolina. So one of those is actually built. It's operational. It's been operational now for the past 6 or 7 years. So I actually met with the farmer a few months ago just to see how everything was going. He was pretty happy with the project. And then from there, I also worked on landfill gas to renewable natural gas. So there's another plant that's operating in Ohio. As things go into space, everything comes full circle. Then got back into developing solar power plants. So I now have another solar project that is being built in Ohio and another one that's being built in Texas as we speak. And then prior to joining the renewable energy space, I was in the military for a number of years. I served overseas 2 years on the demilitarized zone in South Korea, and then 1 year in Iraq. And I was actually surprised that my infantry experience in the military actually prepared me for renewable energy development. So that's how I've gotten to where I'm at today.
Hey, great. Thank you for sharing that background. In our initial conversation, I found it so unique of the actual work that you do. Those are some of the activities you've been involved with. But let's really share your unique role actually in bringing those projects to life. How would you explain the work that you do in those various consultative and supportive roles?
So I start early in the process. So I'm a developer. I've been referred to as a soup to nuts developer. So I'm typically there when a project just starts from a first conversation in a local community. The way that typically works is we go into a community where we think solar or whatever type of technology we're working on, whether it's batteries, renewable natural gas, solar, wind, we think that there's a resource there that can be used. So the first thing we have to do is go in, talk to local leaders just to see if they have any interest in a project that we're proposing. So usually the first step, as everyone knows, a lot of these projects have political connotations to them. And even at a local level, folks are kind of in one camp or the other. So that first conversation reveals where they stand. Sometimes we get hard nosed, we get some strong resistance. Other times we get, not really for it, but would like to hear about the benefits to the community. And then there are other times where people are like, yeah, we'd love to, entertain whatever project we're considering. So it really starts at that first conversation, and then depending on what response we get and how valuable the project is, that determines our next step.
Interesting. So, with your extensive background in both renewables and conventional energy, what do you see as the most significant emerging trends or shifts that are currently challenging project developers and companies in these sectors?
So I think that you have some challenges that are unique to whatever technology that you're proposing. Yeah, but then there are some that are just kind of energy industry specific, or they apply broadly to the energy industry. So right now, what you're seeing, that there's been a shift from wind to solar. Solar is a little bit more preferred locally. The reason for that is wind power projects have a pretty big visual impact on the community, so there's usually a lot of resistance. The wind resource is typically variable. How wind power plants work in power markets. It's a little bit challenging to place a value on wind power plants. So solar projects are a little bit more predictable. They're a little bit more standardized, especially from a financial perspective. Wall Street investors, I think, understand how those projects work. It's a little bit more formulaic. So you've kind of seen over the past 6 years or so a shift and more of an emphasis on solar projects. But then obviously the past year with the new administration in place, the new administration is not favorable to renewable energy at all. So because of that, what has occurred, you've seen a shift back to natural gas. So there are a lot of natural gas plants, combined cycle power plants, peaking power plants, those types of plants that are in the interconnection queue, and they are getting accelerated. And the reason why they're getting accelerated is because those are baseload plants. So it's baseload plants versus so baseload plants can operate all the time. Nuclear is baseload, natural gas, combined cycle, that's baseload. Peaking plants kind of serve, peaking needs, but they're dispatchable, so you can turn them on and off. Whereas, wind and solar are non-dispatchable intermittent resources. So now we're seeing a shift back to baseload, and you're starting to see a lot of nuclear plants that had been retired or offline or underutilized, and now they're becoming more utilized because they're baseload power plants.
Interesting. You've successfully navigated complex political and community landscapes to get major projects approved in your past. What are some of the most common bottlenecks or points of resistance you encounter? And how do these challenges impact a project's timeline and profitability or the communications that's required to move them forward?
So I think when a company is developing a project, any type of project, and they go into a local community, they want the project to succeed, and they're nervous about it. So what happens is they're evasive when they first go in, and people can read that off of you. So if a developer is being evasive, the way that translates to somebody locally is that they start to not trust you, and they start to get suspicious of you. I've seen a few developers go into local communities and they take that type of attack, and what happens is they don't get support from the local community. Now, for those who go in and they're just honest about what they're intending to do, and maybe they get resistance, maybe they don't get resistance, or maybe they're just things to consider, they then move past that first gate. And then the second gate is, well, how do we start engaging property owners who might be involved? So usually the first step there is they start to reach out to larger property owners and try to get their land under contract. So that's typically a financial negotiation. Sometimes you run into somebody who's ideologically against the project, for whatever reason. Maybe they're against renewable energy or just whatever project was coming to the local community. But usually, most companies can get past that step because it just becomes a financial negotiation. It's how much money you're willing to pay in order to get somebody on board. But then kind of the third gate where the bottleneck really occurs is when local folks start to recognize that property is being placed under contract for a project. Neighbors start to get upset about the fact that they're not involved in the project. And that's largely because they have smaller project or smaller property. So they start to resist the project. But there, it's not only that they're against the project, they're against the fact that maybe they don't like their neighbor. They don't want their neighbor to have a project there. They don't want their neighbor to make more money than they do. So there are a whole host of reasons why people start to oppose a project. And what I've seen is that there are a lot of companies that avoid that step, that they won't talk to neighbors because they're afraid of getting that type of opposition. They're even afraid of spending a little bit of money, to bring them into the project. So to me, it's a critical step to get neighbors on board and then to make sure that they're supported. And the reason why that's important is that if you have to go before any county jurisdiction, like a zoning board or a planning board or whatever local approvals are necessary, you need that support. Because if you go into those meetings without the neighbors coming in there saying that they support the project, even if they're silent on it, that's kind of a win. So I see that as being kind of a difficult gating item. So it's really those three steps. Start up with the local community, move on to the property owners that you want in the project, and then from there, you have to engage the neighbors before you start any public process.
Colin, it sounds like you're a true Swiss Army knife in this world, right? Wearing many hats. I kind of see you as a lobbyist, a whip, a consultant, the PR firm, speaking to public, private, governmental organizations, all of this stuff to bring it together. With all of this experience and now your new consulting venture, which is CrossCurrent, what do you feel like, what inspired you to go in this direction and launch this CrossCurrent? And what is your unique value proposition that you can bring to potential clients in the future?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Kreel. Going into a local community, you have to go in with a little bit of presence to begin with. So you have to go in with some past experience that people trust. And then people also want to know that you had some connection, at least at the state level. So I can give you an example. I was in one state, I won't give you the state, but there was one state where I was introduced into somebody where I was introduced to somebody who was pretty well connected politically. And I didn't realize how well connected this person was politically, but he had a lot of trust in the state, and that translated to a local level. And he was actually the reason why a project got approved. It's because people started to recognize that he had some access to political leadership, and he understood what that political leadership was looking for this particular state. So when I saw that, I thought that that's really a model for how to succeed locally. So I'm not the one who actually created this idea. I just saw it, by chance, as I was working through this. And then I developed a strong relationship with this person. And because of that, he sponsored me in this local community and we were able to get a project built. So at that point, I realized that one, I have a skill set of meeting people who are that influential locally. And then if I can take some early steps to build some of the influence that those folks have in a given state, then it might make local project or projects that I'm working on locally have a higher chance of success. So right now, that's why I started CrossCurrent Infrastructure and Political Advisory. It's because there's political component to all of these projects. Big projects, when a lot of money is being spent locally, will automatically become political. Whether you're working on a data center, a power plant, whether you're bringing in a new Walmart, whatever it is, it becomes political because there's money on the table. And you just have to understand what the local politics are and how state and federal politics play into that. And the better you understand it, the more effective you can be. And I think I have a pretty good understanding of our politics where I can go in and be effective in that way.
Do you know how many of these large projects, like the developers here, how many of them get this right and how many do they get this wrong? Because I would imagine sometimes we just feel like you want to press your will on a scenario, whereas what you're really suggesting is, hey, there's more of a nuanced approach here. In your experience, how many big projects are doing this the right way?
So I think you have to think about how these projects actually move forward. So typically, a lot of projects have developers who are very locally focused. So they're state level developers. And they spend a lot of time in local communities developing these relationships. So they're able to go in and effectively get some of the approvals that they need and get the support that they need. So I've seen a lot of those regional developers, be really successful at doing this. But then what happens is you have larger developers. They call themselves development companies. They're really not. They're companies that have some capital. They're backed by larger private equity, and they can acquire these projects. So what they do is they go in and they acquire these projects that a smaller developer had already developed and built, where the small developer, developed all of the relationships. And then this new company comes in and then they don't communicate it very well. They don't communicate the fact that, hey, we are now the owners of the project. Just because we purchased the project doesn't mean that it's ready for financing. There's still a lot more work to do. So that's where I see a lot of larger companies get their local messaging wrong pretty frequently. That you have to go in there with a message right out of the gate and say, we're a new company. We purchased this project. We understand you have great relationships with this past company. Just because we purchased it, the project's not ready for financing. We'll have a lot of work to do. So they just have to position themselves as kind of like a bridge capital source in order to get the project built. So what they really want to do is establish the same relationship that those small developers have. And a lot of them don't. So what happens is the project has a permit, it has an approval, and it moves forward, but then it starts to engender a lot of bad will in local communities, and people start to get upset when that communication isn't done well. And then it makes construction more difficult. It makes operations more difficult. Then you have landowners who get angry, and then they start to negotiate. So you start to lose control of the messaging. So I've seen that happen quite often. But then there are a lot of projects that are in jurisdictions where there aren't any zoning approvals that are necessary, and there are companies that target those areas because you can just build a project. Um, Now, that has a downside if they know that, hey, we don't need any real approvals. Well, we don't have to do this well. So they get move the project forward. But then what happens is it starts to make the industry look bad, if they're aggressive about it and they're not engaging people the way that they. So there's a couple of ways that I would see how companies approached it and haven't really got it completely right.
I see your role as being very influential in these entire processes. So, as you launch CrossCurrent, what are your primary challenges you anticipate in reaching and engaging the right decision makers who will need your unique expertise in project development and stakeholder management?
So I think I'll start off with senior folks in the industry that I know, and I'll reach out to them and see what they're working on. So I've already started that outreach over the past month. So I know that they're working on a lot of different projects. Then there are other projects that I see as being controversial, and or maybe they're stalled for some reason. So for those types of projects, I'll reach out to the developers there, or if there's a local community that's having a problem with the developer, I could work with the local community and work on that side and say, here's how to effectively work with a development company who's doing these things. And then I can start to talk to both sides. And then what I've found in all of this, the focus is always on what's the message that you want to bring locally. And to me, I'm like, yeah, that's a big part of it. You have to know what the message is. But really what people want to see is that you're just there. You just show up. You just have a conversation. You walk in and you let them know who you are, and they start to see you as a person. And you're not a message; you're a person that they know. Before you deliver a message, you have to be somebody who they know, and that takes time, takes commitment. Takes a lot of iterations. I think I've heard one statement before that it takes people, I think, 8 to 10 times before they start listening to a message. So that's really the amount of times that you need to be in a local community, about 10 times, meeting people, not just, going in there and quickly shaking a hand. But you got to go there and get yourself involved with whatever local events that they have there. Meet them on their level. Don't go down there and put a booth there. Go down there with your shirt with your logo on and just hang out with everybody there and say, hey, I'm the solar company, or I'm the wind company, or I'm this company doing this. And just hang out and engage them in the way they engage, and then get to know them. And then as time goes on, they'll say, this guy's he's not going anywhere. So, why don't we just talk to him and see if there's, something we can get done here. So that's how I see things, as going a lot smoother.
Cool. What are some of the, or what's one or two major bottlenecks you wish the industry in general could solve to really help things move forward in a more efficient manner?
Yeah, so everybody's aware of the transmission infrastructure issues. So there are so many projects that are in the interconnection queue. So there's open access. So anybody can really submit an application. So you submit an application to a regional transmission organization, PJM, MISO, whoever it is, and then you go through their process. Now they've made the rules a little bit more strict because they want people who are a little bit more high quality coming into the interconnection queue. So they have some financial requirements, stronger financial requirements up front in order to allow you into the process. But even if you get through the process, there are still massive transmission lines that need to be built, and they are really expensive. So the capital isn't necessarily there in order to fix the transmission infrastructure. So we have, as part of the IRA, you have the ITC, and that helped to fund the solar projects themselves. But there's really no capital that's just available for these transmission grids. So I think that in order to fix that bottleneck, there has to be capital that's associated with that. Maybe another you can turn some of these transmission infrastructure projects into another type of investment vehicle that investors would like. But I see there right now as being kind of the greatest bottleneck, and then that impacts local communities because you're limited as to where you can interconnect. So there are substations that are a little bit more valuable than others, and every developer knows that. So what happens is you have all of these developers that descend on that local community at the same time to get to that substation. So then it creates a local political issue when you have all of these developers that are vying, for access to a substation. And, you have a couple of developers that are negotiating with a landowner. The landowner is negotiating a better deal. So it pits, two developers against each other, two or three. The landowner gets a better deal. He thinks the project's going to move forward. It doesn't. So then the money doesn't come. So there are a whole host of local issues that are also occurring as a result of this transmission issue.
What do you think are some of the big priorities or the trends that are going to be influencing all of this coming into, continuation in 2026 and into 27 in the next couple of years?
So I think right now the solar or the renewable energy industry has to fix their intermittency problem. And a way to fix that is with battery storage. So I know that there are a lot of renewable developers that know this and know that battery storage is kind of the next step. The issue is the way batteries work. They store power, and then they're able to discharge, really up to a certain amount of time. So you have 2-hour batteries, 3-hour batteries, 4-hour batteries. Four is kind of the cap right now. I think you can get the 6-hour discharge. But that's kind of an issue right now is that even if you were to oversize a project, install batteries, and then maybe discharge, it's called load shifting, where you discharge overnight just to deal with whatever base load or parasitic load is happening in the evening. You still can't discharge a battery for long enough that you can meet that entire load. So what happens is let's assume that you're a data center and the data center needs power all the time. It has to be reliable power that it never goes down. And you go up to them and you say, we could develop a solar project with a battery project. They'll already tell you that we know that we're not going to have power for all the time that we need it. So we need grid access. We need, other, alternatives, and then it just becomes too expensive. So really we need, longer duration batteries. I think battery storage companies know this, so they're moving in that direction. We need to implement more batteries. But then I think in the short term, what's also going to happen is you're going to have natural gas peaking plants come online. So natural gas is still, I know that this is kind of against what, a lot of folks in the industry want because, natural gas is fossil fuel. True. Yeah, I mean, if renewable energy were perfect and can serve all these needs, then yeah, we wouldn't need or we wouldn't need natural gas. But the fact is, we still need it, and in order to have baseload power plants. So I think if the industry works a little bit more cooperatively with folks that are in the natural gas space, then we can get a lot more projects approved. Cooperate, we can kind of walk in as a total complete energy industry rather than a renewable energy and a fossil fuel industry. If we can cooperate, then we can influence what politicians or the policies that politicians are implementing.
Interesting. And then for yourself, as you grow out your business over the next year, what's your strategic priorities for let's say, the next 6-12 months?
Well, I think a lot of folks already understand that there's a political component to all of these projects. I think that there are a number of companies that avoid it because it's difficult. So, what happens is they start to just try to hire what are called local outreach people. And the local outreach people, they have relationships and they're out there and, they're good and they have these relationships, but a lot of them don't see the whole project holistically. So then what happens is you have somebody who's more project management focused who gets involved. And then, once you're more project management focused, take a little bit more of an aggressive posture without even knowing it because it's their role to do that. But property owners don't work that way and local people don't work that way. So one of the things that I'd like to do to help the industry is to kind of smooth out that relationship and be a person who could actually go into these local communities and help do this on their behalf. I also understand what the engineering project manager is looking for. I understand that they are concerned about buildability and they're concerned about environmental phase ones. And they're concerned about wetland impacts and the involvement of Army Corps of Engineers and the Fish and Wildlife. And there's a whole permitting component to this. So I understand all of that. I've gone through, quite a bit of those projects that had those types of difficulties. But I think, reaching out to a lot of these companies and saying that there is a way to bridge the project management side along with the outreach side so that really everybody is an outreach person. It's not just the outreach person who you hire, it's everybody. We're all representing the industry when we go to local communities.
This might be like dovetail well into that. So, if you had a magic wand and could solve one persistent problem that you see in the energy project development lifecycle, what would it be and what impact do you think that solution would have on the industry?
I'd say, well, it's really the political piece. Our country right now is so divided, and this is, obviously, I'm talking about the United States right now. The United States is so divided that a lot of these projects fall on one side of the aisle or the other. So, a combined cycle power plant that's going to be viewed more as conservative, a renewable plant, a solar plant, a wind plant, that's going to be viewed more, left side of the aisle. So I see that as being a major problem. Yeah, I remember being in a local meeting, it was a very conservative community, and I was talking about a solar project. And I remember saying that, I've developed natural gas combined cycle projects before. And I remember a property owner interrupted me and said, "Wait a minute, say that again? Natural gas?" I said, "Yeah, natural gas. I developed a natural gas plant." He was like, "Say that again." And I said it again. And I understood why he was challenging me on it. He was like, "You're a renewable person and you're sitting here saying that you would develop natural gas plants." And I'm like, "Of course I would. Why wouldn't I? It's baseload. I understand, how these things have to work together." So if I had a magic wand, it would be to demonstrate to people that we need some of these types of technologies in order to move the entire industry forward, not just renewable energy. And right now we have these two camps that are using these technologies to battle each other. And because they're battling each other, we end up with disjointed policy for transmission lines. We end up with disjointed permitting policies and things of that nature. So that's why I'm doing my best to say that we just need to view this as an industry and we need to work together as an industry. Let's see if we can set our politics aside, at least for a time.
Well, Colin, I think you're very uniquely positioned with your background and your experience to be able to be the person who kind of crosses over from aisle to aisle and have poignant conversations and education in opening doors and getting the right people around the table so that all shareholders are really heard to help move some of these big projects forward. So um, I don't envy your position. I'm sure you've been put into many uncomfortable scenarios, but obviously having an asset like yourself involved in big projects that have a diverse range of shareholders and ideas around it would be super, super valuable in actually, getting projects approved. So thank you so much for being on the podcast and sharing your insights there. If people wanted to get a hold of you and learn more about your work, where's the best place for them to do that?
The best place is my website. So crosscurrent-ipa.com. So IPA is infrastructure and political advisory. So crosscurrent dash.
Colin, any final words before we close here?
Oh, cool. Thank you so much for reaching out. I really appreciate you doing this podcast. I think it's hugely beneficial for the industry. Yeah, I think it really helps the political outreach when we have this type of content and somebody with your skills and your understanding of how to put this all together. So thank you so much for reaching out. I'm really honored to be here today.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. To our audience, if you've enjoyed the conversation, make sure to like, subscribe to the channel, and share it forward to maybe people that you know that could really use the great consulting work that Colin offers. This wraps up another episode of Blue Ocean Solutions Podcast. Take care.